I never thought my life would turn into one of those stories. You know, the ones you hear about, laugh at, shake your head in disbelief until it happens to you. I mean, cheating? That was something other people dealt with, right? The guys who never saw it coming or missed the red flags. But not me. Not Brian, the guy who had it all figured out. Or so I thought. Kimmy and I had been together for 6 years, married for 3. And if you'd asked me before last summer, I would have told you we were solid. Sure, there were cracks, little arguments about dumb stuff like laundry and who forgot to pick up dog food, but nothing serious. Definitely nothing that would end in her screwing around with one of my friends. I still remember that Greece trip like it was yesterday. We planned it for months. A dreamy getaway to Santorini, the kind of Instagram-worthy nonsense Kimmy had been talking about since forever. The sunsets, the whitewashed buildings, the beaches. It all seemed perfect. And it was, at first, Kimmy was extra excited about the trip because we were going with our friends, including Josh. Josh, who I'd known for 10 years. Josh, who was practically a brother to me. Josh, who I trusted with my life. If you'd told me then that the same guy would eventually wreck my marriage, I would have laughed in your face. The first few days were exactly what you'd expect from a Greek vacation. Relaxed, full of ouzo and endless sun. Kimmy was in her element, snapping photos of every damn rock and olive tree. I remember thinking she seemed happy, maybe even happier than usual, but I chalked it up to vacation vibes. You know how women are with travel. It's like they become these different people, all relaxed and free-spirited. I like that about Kimmy, her ability to let loose in new places. It was part of why I fell in love with her. Looking back, though, it wasn't just the scenery making her smile. It was him. It's embarrassing to admit, but the signs were there. In plain sight. Kimmy and Josh always got along. Nothing weird about that. I mean, we were all friends, right? But in Greece, there was this shift. At first, it was subtle. Like, she'd laugh a little too hard at his jokes or sit a little too close during those late-night dinners. But we'd all had too much wine, and I didn't want to be that paranoid guy. I trusted her. I trusted him. One night, a few days into the trip, we were all sitting on this beautiful terrace overlooking the sea. It was one of those perfect Greek nights. Warm breeze, a few stars out. Everyone feeling that post-sunset buzz. Kimmy was next to me, her head on my shoulder, and Josh sat across from us, looking at her in a way that makes my stomach turn even now. But at the time, I thought I was just imagining things. Kimmy had been drinking, and I assumed maybe Josh was just being his usual, overly friendly self. Then it started, the little disappearances. Kimmy and Josh would go off to get more drinks or explore some hidden part of the island while I stayed behind, chatting with our other friends or pretending to be invested in a game of cards. And it didn't feel like anything then, not really. I wasn't insecure. I figured they were just being adventurous, that Kimmy was caught up in the thrill of exploring a new place. Hell, I thought I was being the laid-back, cool husband who wasn't too clingy. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I'd catch her looking at her phone, smiling at texts that I knew weren't from me. She'd disappear for an hour and come back flushed, claiming she'd gone for a walk to clear her head. I'm not an idiot. I wasn't an idiot. But I also didn't want to be the paranoid husband accusing his wife of something without proof. Besides, we were supposed to be on vacation, having the time of our lives. Who wants to ruin that with drama? I told myself to chill out. Maybe it was all in my head. Turns out it wasn't. It wasn't until we got back home that things started to feel different. Greece was over, but whatever had started there was definitely not. I could feel it like this constant weight on my chest. Kimmy was distant. Physically, emotionally, she was checked out. Gone were the late-night cuddles, the random texts throughout the day. In their place, silence. Her phone, once casually left on the counter or couch, was now glued to her hand like it held state secrets. I know what you're thinking, Brian, you idiot. How did you not see it? Trust me, I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. But when you're in it, when it's your life, it's not so obvious. Or maybe it is, and you just don't want to see it. Denial is a powerful thing. One night, I tried to confront her about it. We were sitting on the couch, some stupid Netflix show playing in the background. I turned to her and said, "Is everything okay? You've been off since we got back." She barely looked up from her phone, muttering some excuse about work being stressful, how she was just tired. But I could feel it. She wasn't tired. She was checked out, lost in some other world that didn't include me. It didn't take long for my suspicions to turn into paranoia. I started checking her phone when I could anyway. But she was careful, too careful. The messages I found were mostly innocent, but something about the tone, about the way she was always texting Josh, made my skin crawl. They'd laugh about stupid inside jokes, the kind they'd never had before that trip. Suddenly, they were closer than ever, and I was the outsider looking in. But again, I told myself I was being crazy. Josh was my friend. Josh wouldn't do that to me. Kimmy wouldn't do that to me, right? It all came to a head one Friday night. I'll never forget it. Kimmy had told me she was meeting up with a coworker for drinks. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But this time, something in her voice didn't sit right with me. It was the same flat tone she'd been using for weeks. Emotionless, disconnected, like she didn't even care if I believed her anymore. And that's when I knew. So I did something I'm not proud of. I followed her. Yeah, I know how it sounds, but at that point, I had to know. I was tired of living in this constant haze of doubt, replaying every conversation in my head, questioning every smile she gave me or didn't give me. So I got in my car and followed her to this bar downtown, about 20 minutes away from our house. It was one of those places we never went, the kind of dive bar that catered more to the late-night crowd. She parked, and I stayed back a bit, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I watched as she walked in, looking way more dressed up than she needed to be for a casual drink with a coworker. My gut twisted, but I tried to play it cool. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she was meeting someone from work. But then Josh walked in. My buddy. My friend. The guy I'd known for a decade. And just like that, any doubt I had disappeared. I sat there, staring at the front of that bar, my mind racing. This was it. This was the confirmation I'd been dreading. They weren't just cheating. They were flaunting it right in my face like I wouldn't put two and two together. It took everything in me not to storm in there and tear the place apart. But I couldn't. I didn't know what I'd do if I saw them together, laughing, touching, whatever the hell they were doing in there. I wanted proof. Solid proof. So I waited. After what felt like an eternity, they finally came out. And that's when I saw it. Josh's arm around her waist, pulling her close like she was his. My wife. The woman I'd vowed to spend the rest of my life with. And she leaned into him, smiling in a way I hadn't seen her smile at me in months. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a fling. It wasn't some one-time mistake. This was something more, something real. And it was happening right in front of me. I felt this sickening wave of rage, sadness, and confusion all at once. I wanted to scream, to fight, to confront them right then and there. But I didn't. Instead, I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When Kimmy got home later that night, I was sitting on the couch, waiting for her. She walked in like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just spent the evening wrapped around another man. Her face dropped the second she saw me sitting there. I could tell she knew. Where were you? I asked, my voice shaking more than I'd intended. I wanted to sound calm, composed, but instead I sounded broken. She stared at me for a moment, her face pale, before blurting out the same tired lie she'd been telling for weeks. I was with a coworker. I stood up, closing the distance between us. With Josh, you mean? That did it. Her face went from guilty to panicked in a split second, and for a brief moment, I thought she might actually come clean. But instead, she doubled down. Brian, you're being paranoid. I told you I was with. I saw you, Kimmy, I said, my voice cold, cutting her off. I saw you with him. Don't lie to me anymore. She froze. That was it. No more excuses. No more fake stories. The weight of my words seemed to hit her like a ton of bricks, and for the first time in months, I saw something real in her eyes. Guilt, regret, whatever it wasn't enough. She dropped her purse on the floor and covered her face with her hands, sobbing. But all I could feel was numbness. I stood there, watching my wife cry, feeling like I was watching someone else's life play out. This wasn't us. This wasn't supposed to happen. Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why him? Why now? And that's when she finally said it, through her sobs, through the lies that had held us together for way too long. It just happened, Brian. I didn't mean for it to. She broke down completely, collapsing into the couch, her words barely audible between the sobs. It just happened. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I had a million things I wanted to say, to scream, to ask, but nothing came out. I just stood there, staring at the broken woman in front of me, the one who'd been lying to my face for months, the woman I'd loved, trusted, and built a life with. I felt a mix of pity and anger, like I wanted to console her and shake her at the same time. But I didn't do either. Instead, I turned around and walked out the door, leaving her there alone, sobbing in the dark. The days after that were a blur. I didn't go home. I crashed at a buddy's place, not Josh, obviously, and tried to wrap my head around everything. Kimmy called and texted constantly, alternating between apologizing and trying to explain herself. She begged me to come back, to talk, to work it out. But I couldn't. Not yet. I don't know how to explain it, but after the initial shock wore off, I didn't feel much of anything. I thought I'd be angrier. I thought I'd want revenge. But mostly, I just felt empty. Like my whole life had been one big lie, and I didn't even know where to begin picking up the pieces. Josh didn't reach out. Not once. Coward. I guess he figured he'd done enough damage already. Or maybe he knew I'd kill him if I saw him. Either way, I wasn't surprised. This wasn't a guy who cared about anyone but himself. The friend I thought I had, he didn't exist. Kimmy, though, she wouldn't stop. She kept trying to explain, to justify it. It just happened. She'd say over and over like that made it any better. But nothing she said could change the fact that she betrayed me. With someone I trusted, on a trip that was supposed to bring us closer. And the worst part? I still loved her. God, I hated myself for it, but I did. I wish I could say that walking out of the house that night was the hardest part, that it got easier after that. But it didn't. It got worse, actually, because once the shock wore off and the numbness faded, I was left with this massive pit of anger, betrayal, and yet twisted sense of guilt. Like somehow, maybe I deserved it. Maybe I hadn't been enough. Maybe there was something I missed that pushed her to Josh. I replayed every moment from that trip, every little thing Kimmy did differently. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she laughed at his jokes, how I'd let them disappear together over and over, assuming they were just being friendly. I mean, I practically handed her over, right? I let them get close. I was there the whole time, oblivious. So who was the real idiot? When I finally went back home, about a week later, it wasn't to fix anything. It was just a talk. Maybe I owed myself that much. I couldn't just let everything end with a door slam and silence. But that first conversation? Brutal. Kimmy sat on the couch, pale and red-eyed from crying, like she'd been waiting for this moment. I walked in, feeling a strange sense of detachment, like I was about to have a conversation with a stranger. In some ways, I guess I was. She started with an apology, of course, and I could tell it wasn't fake. She was genuinely sorry. But sorry didn't mean shit to me at that point. Sorry didn't erase what she did. Sorry didn't fix what was broken. It wasn't planned, she kept saying, her voice shaking. Brian, it wasn't like that. It just happened. It just happened. The same excuse she'd been feeding me since that night. And every time she said it, I could feel this wave of resentment rising in my chest. How does cheating with my friend just happen? What? Did she trip and fall into his bed? I need you to explain it to me. I finally said. Because I don't get it, Kimmy. I don't get how this happens. She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. And then she told me. She laid it all out. Apparently, it started back in Greece, like I'd suspected. Those late-night drinks, the long walks while I stayed back thinking I was being the laid-back husband. She said it started as flirting, innocent at first. Then, one night, they kissed. And from there, well, you know where it goes. She swore up and down it hadn't happened before the trip. But it didn't matter, did it? Whether it started in Greece or 3 months before, the fact was she chose him. She made that choice every time she snuck off, every time she lied to my face. And the worst part was, she said she didn't even know why. It wasn't that she didn't love me. She insisted. She was just confused, lonely. Something was missing. I sat there, listening to her talk, and all I could think was, this is my life now. I was that guy. The guy whose wife cheated on him with his friend. And no matter how many explanations she gave, nothing made sense. Nothing made me feel any better. We argued. We cried. She begged for another chance. And I honestly didn't know what to do. Because part of me wanted to forgive her. Part of me wanted to believe that this was some one-time mistake, that we could fix it. But the other part of me, the part that couldn't get those images out of my head, couldn't stop hearing Josh's voice in the back of my mind, knew I'd never be able to trust her again. And what's a marriage without trust? We tried therapy. I'll admit that much. I wasn't ready to just throw in the towel, as insane as that sounds. 6 years together, 3 years married. I couldn't walk away without at least trying to see if there was something left to save. Maybe that was naive, or maybe I just didn't want to face the reality of starting over. But either way, we went. Sitting in that therapist's office, spilling our guts to a stranger was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Kimmy cried through most of the sessions, talking about how she felt lost, how she was sorry, how she wanted to make it right. The therapist said all the things therapists say, stuff about rebuilding trust, healing together, blah, blah, blah. But every time Kimmy said she loved me, all I could think was, how could you love me and still do that? And then there was Josh. The guy was still in our circle like nothing had happened. I found out later he'd broken up with his girlfriend a week after the trip. Nice, right? Like he didn't even feel guilty about it. I couldn't avoid him forever, though. Our group of friends was tight, and cutting him out wasn't as simple as I'd hoped. But you better believe I haven't said a word to him since. He knows he's dead to me. Kimmy? She kept trying to make things better. She started going out less, being more attentive, doing all the things she thought would fix what was broken. But honestly, the damage was done. Every time I looked at her, I saw them together. Every time her phone buzzed, I wondered who it was. I became someone I didn't even recognize. Jealous, paranoid, constantly second-guessing everything. And that's no way to live. It took a few months for me to admit it to myself, but I knew what I had to do. There was no fixing this. Some things break, and you just can't put them back together. I didn't hate Kimmy, but I couldn't stay married to her either. Not after that. The divorce was surprisingly smooth. Kimmy didn't fight me on it. I think she knew it was coming, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. We sold the house, split everything down the middle, and just moved on. It's crazy how quickly you can dismantle a life you spent years building. People always ask if I regret it, if I regret leaving, or if I think maybe I could have forgiven her eventually. The truth? I don't know. Maybe in some alternate universe, we worked it out. But in this one, it wasn't possible. The trust was shattered, and without that, we had nothing. I hear she's doing okay now. We haven't talked much since the papers were signed, but I see things on social media from time to time. Josh, though? I have no idea. Part of me hopes he's as miserable as I was. But in reality, he's probably fine. Guys like him don't lose sleep over stuff like this. As for me, I'm still picking up the pieces. Dating again has been weird, but I'm trying. I've learned a lot about myself through this whole mess. What I want, what I deserve. And yeah, I'm still bitter, but I'm not broken anymore. If there's one thing I've figured out, it's that life goes on, even when you think it won't. Yeah, that's pretty much the end. I mean, life doesn't exactly wrap up with a neat little bow after something like this, right? You just keep going. Looking back, I realize how much that whole mess changed me. Some days, it feels like I lost a piece of myself, and other days, I think I've become someone stronger, someone who finally knows his worth. I don't think about Kimmy much anymore, which is honestly a relief. She's just a chapter of my life now, a chapter I've closed. There's no big dramatic finish here. No grand aha moment where everything suddenly makes sense. It's more like a slow, gradual acceptance of reality. People aren't perfect. They screw up. And sometimes, love isn't enough to keep a marriage alive. But here's the thing, I survived it. It took a while, but I did. And now I'm just trying to figure out what comes next one step at a time.